In the small, isolated village of Eldergrove, nestled deep within the English countryside, the air was perpetually thick with fog, casting a ghostly pallor over the cobblestone streets and thatched roof cottages. The village, seemingly untouched by time, was a place where whispers carried secrets and shadows danced with the unseen. At the heart of this village stood the imposing figure of Dr. Edmund Hawthorne, known to all as the Plague Doctor. His reputation as a savior was unmatched, for he had been the sole guardian against the relentless waves of disease that swept through Eldergrove. Yet beneath his benevolent facade lay a darkness that threatened to consume all. Amelia Hawthorne, his daughter, was a young woman of striking beauty, with raven black hair cascading down her shoulders and eyes that mirrored the stormy skies above. Her life had been one of privilege and respect, shadowed by the towering presence of her father. Yet, as she matured, so too did her curiosity, and the nagging suspicion that her father's nightly excursions were not as altruistic as they seemed. It was on a particularly dreary night, as the wind howled like a banshee outside her window, that Amelia's world began to unravel. She had followed her father, cloaked in the darkness, her heart pounding with each step. What she discovered was beyond her darkest imaginings. In a hidden chamber beneath their home, Dr. Hawthorne conducted gruesome experiments on the very villagers who revered him. Their cries of agony echoed in the dimly lit room, mingling with the pungent scent of decay and despair. Her father, clad in his signature beaked mask, moved with a cold precision, his eyes devoid of empathy as he inflicted unspeakable horrors upon his victims. The revelation shattered Amelia's perception of her father, leaving her torn between familial loyalty and a burgeoning sense of justice. Her nights became plagued with nightmares, her days filled with a growing resolve to put an end to the madness. She began documenting her father's actions, scribbling notes in a journal she kept hidden beneath the floorboards of her room. Each entry was a testament to the atrocities she had witnessed, a chronicle of the suffering wrought by the man she once admired. Dr. Hawthorne, oblivious to his daughter's betrayal, continued his reign of terror, his motivations rooted in a tragic past. As a young man, he had watched helplessly as the plague claimed the lives of his wife and son, leaving him a hollow shell of the man he once was. The memory of their feverish faces, their bodies racked with pain, haunted him relentlessly. He could still hear their cries echoing in the corridors of his mind, a constant reminder of his failure to save them. Consumed by grief and a twisted desire for control, he vowed to conquer death itself, even if it meant sacrificing the lives of others. His experiments, though monstrous, were born from a place of profound loss and desperation, a futile attempt to fill the void left by his family's demise. His hands, once gentle and healing, now bore the stains of his heinous deeds, trembling slightly as he worked late into the night, the flickering candlelight casting grotesque shadows on the walls. He wore his plague doctor mask like a second skin, its beak filled with fragrant herbs that did little to mask the stench of decay that clung to him. As the plague tightened its grip on Eldergrove, the villagers grew increasingly desperate, turning to the plague doctor with pleas for salvation. Their faces were gaunt and hollow, eyes sunken with fear and fatigue. They shuffled through the streets like specters, clinging to the hope that Dr. Hawthorne would deliver them from the pestilence that devoured their loved ones. Amelia, her heart heavy with the weight of her secret, knew the time had come to act. She gathered her evidence, her hands trembling as she clutched the journal that held the key to her father's undoing. Each page was a testament to the horrors she had witnessed, the ink smudged by her tears and the shaking of her hands. With a courage born of necessity, she confronted Dr. Hawthorne, her voice steady despite the fear that clawed at her insides. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, all swirling together in a storm that threatened to overwhelm her. "Father," she began, her eyes locking onto his, "I know what you've done. The experiments, the lies, It must stop. Her voice was a mixture of resolve and heartbreak, each word a dagger aimed at the man who had once been her hero. She could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the brief moment of vulnerability before his expression hardened into one of defiance. The room was silent, save for the distant wail of the wind outside, as father and daughter faced each other, the chasm between them widening with every heartbeat. Dr. Hawthorne's face twisted into a mask of rage, his eyes narrowing as he regarded his daughter with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You know nothing, Amelia," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Everything I've done for us. For this village." His words were laced with desperation, a futile attempt to justify the horrors he had wrought. He took a step toward her, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, the air between them charged with tension. Amelia shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "You've become the very monster you sought to defeat. These people trust you, and you've betrayed them." Her voice wavered, the weight of her words pressing down on her like a physical force. She could see the conflict in her father's eyes, the war waging within him between the man he once was and the monster he had become. The confrontation escalated, words exchanged like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. In a moment of rage, Dr. Hawthorne lunged at Amelia, his hands closing around her throat. The world blurred as she struggled against his grip, her vision darkening at the edges. Her mind screamed in panic, her thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and disbelief. But just as quickly as it began, it ended. The villagers, drawn by the commotion, burst into the room, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Amelia, gasping for breath, managed to speak, her voice hoarse but resolute. "He's been spreading the plague, using us as his experiments. This journal, it has everything." Her words hung in the air, a lifeline thrown to the desperate souls gathered around her. She could see the realization dawning on their faces, the slow shift from disbelief to anger as the truth took hold. The villagers, once blinded by reverence, now saw the truth laid bare before them. Their anger, once directed at the disease that ravaged their lives, turned toward the man they had trusted. In a surge of collective fury, they seized Dr. Hawthorne, dragging him from his sanctuary and into the streets of Eldergrove. His protests fell on deaf ears, his cries for mercy swallowed by the roar of the crowd. The villagers, driven by a thirst for justice and revenge, decided that he would face the same fate he had inflicted on so many others. They dragged him to the village square, where the remnants of his victims lay buried beneath the earth. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and decay, a fitting backdrop for the grim proceedings. The villagers fashioned a crude scaffold, its wooden beams splintered and rough, and bound Dr. Hawthorne to it. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now darted wildly, reflecting the terror that gripped him. Before the pyre was lit, they subjected him to the same tortures he had inflicted on others. They used crude instruments, rusted and stained, to replicate his grotesque experiments. Needles pierced his skin, drawing forth rivulets of blood that stained his once pristine coat. The villagers, fueled by rage, took turns inflicting pain, their faces twisted in a mix of satisfaction and horror. They carved into his flesh with jagged blades, creating a macabre tapestry of suffering that mirrored the agony he had caused. Each scream that escaped his lips was met with a chilling cheer from the crowd, a grotesque celebration of vengeance. As the flames of the makeshift pyre began to lick the night sky, the villagers hurled accusations and curses, their voices a haunting chorus that echoed through the square. The fire crackled and roared, its heat searing the air, casting grotesque shadows that danced like specters around the condemned man. Dr. Hawthorne's screams pierced the night, a chilling symphony of agony and despair that reverberated through the village, mingling with the crackling of the flames. His skin blistered and charred, the acrid smell of burning flesh permeating the air. a final testament to his monstrous deeds. Amelia watched, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she had lost a father but saved a village. Her eyes were dry, the tears having long since run their course, leaving only a hollow ache in their wake. The sight before her was both a grim justice and a haunting reminder of the darkness that can fester within the human soul. But as the fire consumed Dr. Hawthorne, the villagers began to feel a creeping unease settle over them. The flames flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The air grew thick with the stench of charred flesh, and the villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier fervor waning. They had sought justice, yet the victory felt hollow, tainted by the grotesque spectacle they had created. In the days that followed, Eldergrove slowly began to heal, but the shadow of the plague doctor loomed larger than ever. The villagers, once fractured by fear and suspicion, now found themselves haunted by the specter of their own actions. Whispers of the plague still lingered in the air, a constant reminder that the disease was not truly vanquished. Children fell ill, their laughter replaced by the sounds of coughs and wheezes, and the once vibrant fields began to wither, as if the land itself mourned the horrors that had unfolded. Amelia, though she had faced her father and witnessed his end, felt a gnawing dread take root in her heart. She became a guardian of truth, her journal a testament to the courage it took to stand against the darkness. Yet, as she wrote, she could not shake the feeling that the darkness was not gone. It had merely shifted, waiting for its moment to strike again. The villagers began to speak of strange occurrences, cattle found dead in the fields, crops rotting overnight, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. At night, when the wind howled through the village like a mournful wail, some claimed to hear the faint echoes of a man's screams carried on the breeze, a chilling reminder of the plague doctor's final moments. The children, once carefree, now huddled together, their eyes wide with fear as they whispered stories of the man who had tortured and killed. The square where Dr. Hawthorne had met his end became a place of unease, where even the bravest dared not tread after dusk. Amelia often found herself standing at the edge, staring into the darkness, feeling as though something watched her from the shadows. The villagers avoided the area, their guilt festering like an open wound, and the fear of the plague returned, gnawing at their hearts. As the seasons changed, the village thrived outwardly, but within, an insidious rot took hold. Amelia remained vigilant, yet she could not shake the feeling that the true horror was not just in what they had done to Dr. Hawthorne, but in the darkness that now dwelled within them all. The village, forever changed by the events, stood as a grim testament to the fragility of humanity, a beacon of dread in a world shrouded in shadows. And so, Eldergrove lived on, haunted by the specter of the plague doctor, whose legacy lingered like a curse. The villagers, despite their efforts to move forward, could not escape the feeling that they had not rid themselves of the plague, but had merely unleashed a new one that festered in their hearts and minds, waiting for the right moment to strike.